3 months after our divorce, my ex-husband showed up at my parents' house, begging to see me. My dad opened the door and told him, "You had your chance." Then my ex said 6 words that changed everything. I was standing in the hallway when I heard those 6 words through the front door. I remember my mother reaching for my arm. I remember my father's voice going completely quiet. And I remember thinking that whatever my ex had come to say, it couldn't possibly change what had already happened. I was wrong. My name is Claire, and I was 31 years old when my marriage ended. Before everything fell apart, I never imagined I'd be living in my parents' house at 31, sleeping in the bedroom I'd grown up in, and trying to figure out who I was without the man I'd once expected to grow old with. My parents never made me feel ashamed about coming home. That was probably the thing that saved me. My mom, Linda, didn't ask how long I planned to stay. My dad, Robert, didn't ask what I was going to do next. They just cleared out the spare room, put fresh sheets on the bed, and told me I could take as much time as I needed. But 3 months after the divorce, I genuinely believed the hardest part was behind me. I didn't know my ex-husband was about to stand on my parents' porch and say something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the end of my marriage. I met Daniel when I was 25. He was funny without trying too hard, ambitious without constantly talking about himself, and somehow able to make ordinary things feel exciting. Our first date was supposed to be coffee. It turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a walk around downtown. By the time he dropped me off, we'd talked for almost 7 hours. When I told my mom about him the next morning, she smiled and said, "That sounds promising." My dad was less enthusiastic. "Does he treat you well?" I laughed. "Dad, I've known him for 2 weeks." "That's not an answer." I rolled my eyes. "He does." Dad nodded. "Then I like him." That was my father. He didn't need to know everything. He just wanted to know whether I was safe. Daniel eventually became part of our family. He came to Sunday dinners. He helped my dad fix things around the house. He brought my mom flowers on Mother's Day. At Christmas, he knew exactly which pie she liked. There were years when I couldn't imagine my parents without him, and for a while, I couldn't imagine my life without him either. We got married when I was 28. The wedding wasn't extravagant. My mom cried before I even walked down the aisle. My dad tried not to. Daniel squeezed my hand during the ceremony so tightly that afterward I teased him about nearly cutting off my circulation. He laughed. I was nervous. "You?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at me. "Because this was the biggest decision of my life." I believed him. That's what made everything that happened later so difficult to understand. The first year of our marriage was good. Not perfect. Real. We argued about money, occasionally. We disagreed about where to spend holidays. He left cabinet doors open. I forgot to replace the toilet paper. Normal things. Nothing that made me question whether we'd made a mistake. Then, sometime during our second year, Daniel started changing. It wasn't dramatic. That's the part people don't understand about relationships ending. Sometimes there isn't one huge explosion. Sometimes someone simply becomes less present. Daniel started working later. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then he began taking his phone everywhere. Even into the bathroom. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd sometimes turn the screen down. When I asked about it, he'd say, "Work." I wanted to believe him. So I did. Mostly. One night, I was making dinner when he came home almost 2 hours late. "You didn't answer your phone," I said. "I was busy." "I called twice." "I know." Something about the way he said it bothered me. "You know?" He dropped his keys on the counter. "Claire, I had a long day." I turned off the stove. I was worried. He sighed. I said I'm sorry. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became a pattern. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped telling me about his. We could sit on the same couch for an hour without speaking. Sometimes I'd look over and realize he was staring at his phone, instead of watching the show we'd put on. One night, I finally asked him, "Are you unhappy?" He looked surprised. "What? Are you unhappy with me?" He laughed once. Not because it was funny, because he didn't know what to say. Where is this coming from? From you. He stared at me. What does that mean? It means I don't feel like we're married anymore. His expression hardened. That's dramatic. That word stayed with me. Dramatic. I had started noticing that whenever I brought up something that hurt me, he made the problem my reaction. If I asked questions, I was suspicious. If I was hurt, I was emotional. If I wanted reassurance, I was needy. Eventually, I stopped asking. And that was when my mother noticed something was wrong. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had gone to my parents' house alone. Mom was making coffee when she looked at me and said, "You look tired." "I'm fine." She didn't answer. She just put a mug in front of me. "There." I looked up. "What?" "You don't have to say you're fine every time you're not." I stared into my coffee. "I don't know what's happening." Her expression softened. "With Daniel?" He nodded. She sat across from me. "Tell me." I did. "Not everything. Not at first. But enough." When I finished, Mom reached across the table and held my hand. "Have you talked to him?" "Yes." "And?" "He says everything is fine." Mom was quiet. Then she said, "Do you believe him?" I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. That evening, Dad found me sitting alone on the back porch. He sat beside me. "Your mother told me you're having a hard time." He sighed. "Of course she did. She worries." "I know." Dad looked toward the yard. "Do you want me to say something to him?" I immediately shook my head. "No." "Okay." That surprised me. I looked at him. "You're not going to argue?" "No." "Why?" "Because you're an adult." He paused. "But if you ever tell me someone is hurting you, I'll be there." I looked down. "I don't even know if he's hurting me." Dad nodded. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." I started crying. He didn't tell me to stop. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He just sat there. After a while he said, "Whatever happens, you don't have to go through it alone." I wish I could say that conversation changed everything. It didn't. I went home the next morning. And I tried harder. That was probably my biggest mistake. I thought if I became easier to love, things would return to normal. I cooked more. I asked fewer questions. I stopped complaining when Daniel came home late. I gave him space. I told myself every marriage went through difficult periods. Then one night, he sat across from me at our kitchen table and said, "I think we should get divorced." I remember staring at him for several seconds, not because I hadn't feared it, because hearing it made everything suddenly real. "What?" "I don't think this is working anymore." I laughed. It was a strange, nervous sound. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Is there someone else?" He looked away. That was my answer. I didn't ask for a name. I didn't need one. I spent the next several days moving through the house like a person who had forgotten how things worked. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. I kept thinking about all the little moments I'd dismissed. The phone. The late nights. The distance. The way he'd stopped looking at me. My parents wanted me to come home. I refused at first. I told Mom I could handle it. She said, "I know you can. I'm asking you not to handle it alone." That broke me. I packed a bag. Dad came to pick me up. He carried it to the car without saying anything. On the drive home, I stared out the window. After 10 minutes, Dad said, "You don't have to talk." "I know. Just wanted you to know." He nodded. The divorce took several months. There were lawyers, documents, conversations I never thought I'd have. We divided our belongings. Some things were easy, some weren't. One Saturday, I found myself holding a coffee mug Daniel had given me during our first Christmas together. I almost kept it. Then I put it in a box. I didn't want to keep reminders of a life that no longer existed. When the divorce became official, I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt empty. Mom made dinner that night. Dad opened a bottle of sparkling cider. "Your mother says we're celebrating." I smiled weakly. "Celebrating what?" Dad raised his glass. "Surviving." Mom laughed through tears. "To surviving." I raised mine. "To surviving." For the first time in months, I smiled and meant it. The next few weeks were slow. I started going for walks in the morning. I found a therapist. I cleaned out my closet. I started applying for jobs. I learned how to spend an entire Saturday alone, without automatically reaching for my phone. I even started laughing again. Not constantly, but sometimes. And every time I laughed, Mom looked at me like she was afraid it might disappear. 3 months after the divorce, I finally felt like myself again. Not the old me. Someone different. Someone who knew she could survive losing the person she thought she needed. Daniel had stopped calling. I stopped checking whether he had. It was peaceful. Then, one cold Thursday evening, everything changed. Mom and I were in the kitchen. Dad was watching television in the living room. I was helping her put away groceries when I heard the doorbell. Dad stood up. "I'll get it." I didn't think anything of it. Then I heard his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Ifros." Mom looked at me. I looked toward the hallway. A man's voice came through the closed door. "Robert, please. I just need to talk to Claire." My heart dropped. Daniel. Mom's face went pale. Dad opened the door, only a few inches. "You need to leave. Please." "No." "I know I don't have the right to ask." "You're right." There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, "I just need 5 minutes." Dad's voice became quieter. "You had your chance." I couldn't move. Mom reached for my hand. Daniel spoke again. His voice sounded different. Not angry, not defensive. Desperate. "I know." Dad didn't answer. "I know, I ruined everything," Daniel said. "I know Claire doesn't owe me anything." My chest tightened. Then he said the 6 words I would replay in my head for months. "Your daughter was never the problem." I stared at Mom. She stared back at me. Dad went completely silent. And I knew, before anyone said another word, that whatever had brought Daniel back to my parents' house had nothing to do with wanting another chance at our marriage. There was something he had been hiding. Something my parents didn't know. And judging by the silence on the other side of that door, my father had just realized that too. For several seconds, nobody moved. I was standing in the hallway, with my mother beside me, both of us staring toward the front door. Dad was still on the other side of it with Daniel. I could hear my father's voice, lower now. "What does that mean?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. "It means Claire wasn't the reason I left." My stomach dropped. Mom looked at me. I looked back at her. Dad opened the door, just enough for us to see him. His expression had changed. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked confused. And somehow, that scared me more. "Come inside," Dad said. Daniel stepped through the doorway. He looked nothing like the man I had been married to. His coat was wrinkled. His hair was damp from the snow outside, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted, but I didn't let that make me feel sorry for him. "Not yet." He stopped when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he quietly said, "Hi, Claire." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because after everything that had happened, after 3 months of silence, after the divorce papers, and the empty apartment, and all the nights I had spent wondering how someone I loved could become such a stranger, that was all he had. "Hi?" Daniel swallowed. "I know I don't have the right to be here." "No," Dad said. "You don't." "Dad," Mom said softly. My father looked at her, then back at Daniel. "I let you in because my daughter deserves to know why you showed up. That's the only reason." Daniel nodded. "I understand." I folded my arms. "Then tell me." He looked at me. "I came because there's something I should have told you before we got divorced." My chest tightened. "You had months." "I know. You had every opportunity." "I know. You had lawyers. You had phone calls. You had emails. You had 100 chances to tell me whatever this is." "I know." I stared at him. "Then why didn't you?" Daniel looked down at the floor. "Because I was scared." Dad gave a short, humorless laugh. "Scared of what?" Daniel finally looked up. "Of telling her the truth and making things worse." I felt something inside me snap. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I know. Stop saying you know. He went quiet. Mom stepped closer to me. Claire, she said gently, let him explain. I looked at her. She wasn't defending him. She was giving me a choice. That mattered. I turned back to Daniel. Fine. Explain. He sat down slowly in the chair near the entryway. I stayed standing. So did Dad. Daniel rubbed his hands together. When we first started having problems, he said, you thought I was pulling away because I didn't love you anymore. I didn't answer, because that was exactly what I had thought. You started coming home later, I said. You stopped talking to me. You were always checking your phone. You stopped telling me where you were. I know. And every time I asked what was wrong, you told me I was imagining things. His eyes closed briefly. I lied. That word hung in the room. Mom's expression changed. Dad's jaw tightened. I felt my hands go cold. What were you lying about? Daniel looked at me. My job. I frowned. What does your job have to do with our marriage? More than you know. He took another breath. When the problems started at work, I thought they were temporary. I was working for a company that had been going through a major restructuring. My department was being audited. There were financial decisions being made that didn't make sense to me. I waited. Daniel continued. At first I thought it was just normal corporate politics. People moving money between departments. Numbers being adjusted. Reports being changed. Dad interrupted. Changed how? Daniel looked at him. Not obviously. That's what made it difficult. He turned back to me. I started noticing that certain expenses were being approved under projects that didn't exist. Then I noticed payments going to outside consultants who didn't seem to do any work. I stared at him. And you were involved? No. His answer came immediately. But someone made it look like I was. The room went silent. I felt my heart begin pounding. What? Daniel leaned forward. About 5 months before we separated, I found an internal report with my name attached to several transactions. I couldn't speak. He continued. I didn't authorize them. I didn't even know about most of them. But my employee credentials had been used. Dad's face hardened. Did you report it? Daniel nodded. To my supervisor. And? He told me not to worry about it. That sounds reassuring, Dad said. Daniel gave him a tired look. It wasn't. I sat down across from him. For the first time since he arrived, I wasn't thinking about our marriage. I was thinking about the possibility that something had been happening around him that I had never known about. What happened after that? I asked. My supervisor told me to forget about the report. And you did? No. Daniel looked at me. That was my mistake. I waited. I kept digging. Mom sat beside me. Daniel, she said, what did you find? He hesitated. Enough to scare me. Dad folded his arms. That's still not explaining why you treated my daughter the way you did. Daniel looked at him. No, it doesn't. He looked back at me. And that's the part I can't take back. His voice cracked slightly. When I realized someone was using my credentials, I became terrified that whoever was doing it would eventually come after me. I remembered those months. The late nights. The unexplained phone calls. The way Daniel would stare at his laptop and suddenly close it when I walked into the room. The arguments. The distance. The night I had asked him, crying, whether there was someone else. He had said, no, but he had never told me the truth. You could have told me, I whispered. I should have. You made me think you didn't love me. I know. You made me think there was another woman. There wasn't. You made me think our marriage was falling apart because I wasn't enough. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. That was never true. I looked away. For months after the divorce, I had wondered what was wrong with me. I had replayed conversations in my head. I had wondered if I had been too demanding, too emotional, too independent, too boring, not attractive enough, not patient enough. And now, he was sitting in my parents' house, telling me that the thing I had blamed myself for might never have been about me. That didn't make me feel better. It made me angry. You don't get to give me that back, I said. Daniel looked confused. What? My confidence. I wiped my eyes. You don't get to walk in here 3 months later and tell me I was never the problem and expect me to suddenly feel okay. I don't. Because you took something from me. He nodded slowly. I know. And I'm still dealing with it. I know. Dad finally spoke. Then tell her the rest. Daniel looked at him. What rest? You came here for a reason. Daniel went pale. Dad's voice remained calm. You don't show up at a woman's parents' house 3 months after a divorce just to apologize. Daniel looked down. You're right. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. I immediately stiffened. He pulled out a small envelope. He held it in both hands. I came because I found this. He placed it on the coffee table. I stared at it. What is it? Copies of documents. From your company? Yes. Why bring them here? Because I don't trust the people who have the originals. Dad looked at the envelope. What does this have to do with Claire? Daniel looked at me. They used our marriage as part of the story. I felt my stomach turn. What story? He opened the envelope. Inside were several printed pages. He spread them across the table. I recognized my name. Then Daniel's. Then our old address. I picked up the first page. It was an internal company document. My eyes moved across the page. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. There was a transaction listed under Daniel's employee identification. The date was familiar. I looked at him. That was the week you started sleeping in the guest room. He nodded. Yes. I picked up another page. Another transaction. Another date. Another one. The dates stretched across several months. These were happening while we were married. Yes. And you knew. I suspected. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know who I could trust. I put the papers down. You could have trusted me. Daniel looked at me for a long time. I know that now. Dad shook his head. No, you should have known that then. Daniel didn't argue. That was the first thing he had said all night that made me believe he was actually accepting responsibility. He wasn't asking me to forgive him. He wasn't telling me he had no choice. He was admitting he had made choices. Bad ones. I asked, why did you ask for the divorce? Daniel's face changed. That was the worst decision I made. But you asked. Yes. Why? He looked at Mom. Then Dad. Then me. Because I thought if we separated, they wouldn't be able to use you to get to me. I stared at him. What? I started getting anonymous messages. Dad's expression darkened. What kind of messages? They mentioned Claire. My heart stopped. Daniel immediately raised a hand. They never threatened her directly. That's not what I asked, Dad said. They knew where she worked. They knew where we lived. They knew when she traveled. Mom covered her mouth. I felt numb. Daniel continued. I thought if we weren't married anymore, you would become less important to them. I whispered. So you divorced me to protect me? I thought I was protecting you. You abandoned me. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. And I was wrong. I looked at the floor. That was the cruelest part. Because I could understand his fear, but understanding it didn't erase what he had done. Mom reached for my hand. Daniel watched her. I know everyone wants to think I came here because I want Claire back. I looked at him. Do you? He hesitated. Then he answered honestly. I still love you. My chest tightened. But I'm not here to ask you to take me back. I looked up. That wasn't what I expected. Then why are you here? He pointed to the documents. Because I finally found proof that the person who was using my credentials wasn't doing it alone. Dad leaned forward. Who? Daniel shook his head. I don't have everything yet. But you have enough to know who. I have a pretty good idea. Name them. Daniel looked at me. Someone from my company has been moving money through accounts connected to vendors. My credentials were being used to approve some of the transactions. And after I started asking questions, they began building a case that would make it look like I was responsible. I felt a chill. So your divorce was part of your plan to protect me?
No.
He looked ashamed. It was my attempt to fix a problem I didn't know how to fix.
Dad stood up.
And instead, you broke my daughter's heart.
Daniel nodded. Yes.
Nobody spoke. Then Mom asked quietly, "What happens now?" Daniel looked at her. "I don't know." That answer felt more honest than anything else he had said. "I've already given copies of some documents to an attorney. I'm trying to protect myself legally, but I needed Claire to know what really happened before someone else decided the story for her." I looked at the papers again. There were still things that didn't make sense. "Why did you wait 3 months?" Daniel looked down. "Because I thought you were finally healing." I almost laughed. "You thought disappearing was helping me heal?"
No.
He swallowed. "I thought showing up would destroy whatever peace you had."
It did.
He closed his eyes. "I know."
He stood.
"Then why come now?" He looked at me. "Because yesterday, I found a document with your name on it." My heart sank. "What document?" Daniel reached into the envelope again. He pulled out one final page. He didn't hand it to me immediately. "What is it?" I asked. "A beneficiary form." "For what?" "A life insurance policy connected to my employer."
I stared at him.
"What does that have to do with me?" Daniel's voice dropped. "Someone listed you as the beneficiary." I couldn't speak. Dad stepped forward.
Did Daniel list her? No.
"Then who did?" Daniel looked at me. "I don't know." Mom squeezed my hand. I stared at the page. My name was there, my address, my date of birth, everything. But there was another name at the bottom, a name I recognized. My father did too. He took the page from my hand. His face changed. "That's not possible." "What?" I asked. Dad looked at Mom.
Then, at Daniel.
"That's the name of Daniel's former supervisor."
Daniel nodded.
"Exactly."
I felt dizzy.
"Why would he name me?" "I don't know." "Then find out." "I've been trying."
Daniel.
He looked at me. For the first time that night, I saw something beyond regret in his eyes.
Fear.
Real fear. I think the people who were trying to frame me realized they couldn't control what happened after the divorce.
Dad stared at him.
"What does that mean?" Daniel answered quietly. "It means they may have been watching Claire because they thought she knew something." I shook my head. "I didn't know anything." "I know." "Then why me?" "I don't know."
Mom stood.
"That's enough." Everyone looked at her. She wasn't angry. She was scared. "Claire has been through enough," she said. "Whatever this is, she needs time to process it."
Daniel nodded.
"I agree." He put the documents back into the envelope. Then he looked at me. "I won't come back unless you ask me to." I didn't answer. He walked toward the door. Dad followed him. Before Daniel stepped outside, I said his name. He stopped. I didn't know why I had called him. Maybe because there was one question still burning inside me. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Daniel turned around.
Yes.
"When?" He looked at me for a long moment. "When I knew you were safe." My eyes filled with tears. And was I ever safe? Daniel's expression broke. "I don't know." Then he walked out. Dad closed the door. For several seconds, Mom and I stood in silence. Then she turned toward me. "Come sit down."
I did.
She sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." Mom took my hand. "You don't have to decide tonight." "What if he's telling the truth?" "Then you'll deal with the truth." "What if he's lying?" "Then you'll deal with that too." I looked at her. She smiled sadly. "You spent months trying to understand why your marriage fell apart. You don't have to understand everything tonight just because Daniel finally decided to talk." Dad came back into the room. He sat across from us. I checked the documents. I looked at him.
How?
"I called someone I trust." That sounded like Dad.
Home.
"Careful. never making a decision before he had enough information, and he looked at me. Some of the documents appear legitimate. My stomach tightened. Some?
He nodded.
We need a lawyer to verify the rest. I looked at the envelope on the table. Dad reached for it. We're going to handle this carefully.
He nodded.
Then Dad said something that surprised me. Whatever Daniel did, you don't owe him your marriage. I looked at him. But, if what he says is true, then the truth matters. He paused. But forgiveness is still your decision.
Mom nodded.
And so is whether he ever gets another place in your life. I looked between them. For the first time in months, I realized something. My parents weren't trying to tell me what to do. They weren't telling me to take Daniel back. They weren't telling me to hate him. They were simply reminding me that I still had a choice. That mattered more than I could explain. The next morning, I met with an attorney recommended by Dad. We spent nearly 2 hours going through the documents. Some were ordinary corporate paperwork. Others were more concerning. The attorney couldn't confirm the entire story, but she did confirm something important. The transactions Daniel had shown me appeared to involve real accounts, and several had been approved using Daniel's credentials. But that doesn't prove Daniel did it, she said. What would prove it? We'd need access to the underlying records. And can we get those? If there is an active investigation, possibly. I looked at her. Do you think he was telling the truth? She leaned back. I think your ex-husband has a serious problem. That wasn't an answer. Maybe there wasn't one yet. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved slowly. Daniel kept his promise. He didn't contact me directly. Everything went through the attorney. I learned more about what had been happening at his company. There had been an internal audit. Several employees had been questioned. His former supervisor had resigned suddenly. One executive had hired an attorney. And then, one afternoon, my attorney called me. We found something. My heart jumped. What? A deleted email. From Daniel?
No.
Then who? She told me the sender's name. It was the same supervisor whose name appeared on the insurance document. What did it say? She paused. It suggests they knew Daniel was going to discover the transactions. I sat down. And the divorce? That part isn't clear. I closed my eyes. But suddenly, so many things from those final months of my marriage looked different. Daniel's late nights, his fear, the arguments, the way he would sometimes stare at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't. The night he told me, "You'd be better off without me." At the time, I thought he was ending our marriage. Maybe he had been trying to warn me. But that didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't erase the loneliness. It didn't erase the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. It didn't erase the fact that he had made a decision for both of us without giving me the truth. A few days later, Daniel asked to meet me. I agreed. Not because I wanted him back, because I wanted answers. We met at a small coffee shop near my parents' house. He looked nervous when he saw me. I didn't know if you'd come. I almost didn't.
He nodded.
I understand. I sat across from him. I need you to answer something honestly.
Okay.
If you could go back, would you still divorce me? He stared at the table.
No.
Would you still lie to me? He took a long breath.
No.
Would you still try to protect me without telling me what was happening?
No.
Then what would you do? He looked at me. I'd trust you. That answer hurt more than I expected, because it was exactly what I had wanted from him all along. Not perfection, not protection. Trust. I loved you, I said. I know. No, I don't think you do. He looked at me. I loved you enough to stand beside you if you had told me the truth. His eyes filled with tears. I know that now. I could have chosen whether to stay. I know. You took that choice away from me.
He nodded. I did.
I looked out the window. I'm not promising you anything. I don't expect you to. And I don't know if I'll ever forgive you. I understand. But I don't hate you. He looked surprised. I continued. I hate what happened. I hate what you did. I hate that you let me think I wasn't enough. He lowered his eyes. But I don't hate you. He nodded slowly. That means more than you know. We sat there for another few minutes. Then he said, "There's one more thing." I almost smiled. Of course there is. He reached into his pocket. This time, he didn't pull out documents. He pulled out a photograph. It was from our wedding. I was laughing. Daniel was looking at me. He put it on the table. I kept this because I didn't want the last thing I remembered about us to be the divorce. I stared at the picture, then I pushed it back toward him. You can keep it. He looked at me. Are you sure?
Yes.
He put it away.
He stood.
I need to go.
He nodded.
I understand. I walked outside. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from my marriage. I felt like I was walking toward my own life. Months later, the investigation finally became public. The company announced that several executives were under investigation for financial misconduct. Daniel's name was cleared. The transactions connected to his credentials had been traced to other employees. His former supervisor was questioned. The insurance document was explained too. It had been part of an internal policy arrangement that had been improperly altered during the same period. Daniel hadn't created it. I hadn't been targeted because I knew something. My name had simply been used as part of an attempt to create another layer of confusion. That truth didn't make everything better. But it gave me something I hadn't had since the divorce. Clarity. Daniel eventually apologized to my parents. Dad listened. Mom cried. I stood in the kitchen and heard Daniel say, "I hurt your daughter because I thought I could fix everything myself." Dad answered quietly, "You can't protect someone by taking away their right to choose."
Daniel nodded.
I know. This time, when he said it, I believed him. Daniel and I didn't get back together. That wasn't because the love had never been real. It was because love wasn't enough to rebuild what trust had destroyed. He had consequences to live with.
So did I.
But there was no bitterness between us anymore. Eventually, we learned how to speak without reopening every wound. I moved into my own place. I started making plans that belonged only to me. And my parents remained exactly what they had been before all of it happened. My safe place. One Sunday afternoon, I was sitting with Mom on their back porch, when Dad came outside with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me.
You okay?
He asked. I smiled.
Yeah.
He sat down. Really? I looked at my parents, then at the house behind us, then at the quiet street. For the first time in a long time. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand.
Dad nodded. Good.
I thought about that night, when Daniel had stood at their front door. 3 months after our divorce. 3 months after I had convinced myself that he was finally out of my life. He had come back carrying the truth. Not an apology.
Not a promise.
The truth. And somehow, that truth had given me something I hadn't realized I needed. The ability to stop blaming myself. I used to think the end of my marriage was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Now I see it differently. The worst part wasn't losing Daniel. It was losing myself while trying to save a relationship that I couldn't save alone. And the best thing my parents ever did wasn't protecting me from him. It was letting me make my own decision once I finally knew the truth. Daniel had been right about one thing that night. I wasn't the problem. But I also wasn't responsible for fixing everything that came after. That part was finally mine to choose. And I chose myself.